This is John Nichols of The Nation magazine, and you're listening to the Ralph Nader Radio Hour.
Stand up, you've been sitting way too long.
Welcome to the Ralph Nader Radio Hour. My name is Steve Scrovan, along with my co-host David Feldman. Hello, David.
Hello, Steve.
And our producer, Hannah Feldman. Hello, Hannah.
Hello, Steve.
And the man of the hour, Ralph Nader. Hello, Ralph.
Hello, everybody.
First up on today's program, we welcome the co-founders of Doctors Against Genocide, Dr. Karameh Hawash-Kuemmerle and Dr. Nidal Jboor. Doctors Against Genocide is a global health coalition committed to confronting and preventing genocide, war crimes, and crimes against humanity. Their operations are currently focused on ending the acute genocide in Gaza, so we'll speak to the doctors about how they hope to succeed where global governments have failed in confronting genocide. In the second half of the show, we're going to continue our series where we highlight ordinary citizens who are doing extraordinary work. A few months ago, we spoke to Diana Kastenbaum, who's organizing town halls across her congressional district in upstate New York. Then we spoke to John Merriman, who's taking it upon himself to travel across the country to pick up trash wherever he finds it. Today, we'll welcome another doer, Marcus Sims, who has spent decades reclaiming logs felled by storms or removed to make way for development in the Washington, D.C. area. His company, Treincarnation, saves these trees from the wood chipper and uses them to create sustainably harvested lumber and build custom furniture. We'll speak to Marcus about one of his largest projects, more than a dozen tables for the newly expanded Tacoma Park, Maryland Library. As always, somewhere in the middle, we'll check in with our indomitable corporate crime reporter, Russell Mokhiber. But first, we're going to hear from the founders of Doctors Against Genocide. David?
Dr. Karameh Hawash-Kuemmerle is a clinical pediatric neurologist who specializes in traumatic brain injury and epilepsy at Boston Children's Hospital. Dr. Nidal Jboor is a doctor of internal medicine and geriatrics working in Michigan. They are co-founders of Doctors Against Genocide. Welcome to the Ralph Nader Radio Hour, Dr. Karameh Hawash-Kuemmerle and Dr. Nidal Jboor.
Thank you for having us. It's an honor to be here.
Thank you for having us. We're honored to be here with you and with Mr. Nader, and thank you for giving us this opportunity.
Welcome indeed, doctors. What I like about Doctors Against Genocide is you focus on the belly of the beast, which is the U.S. Congress. And so tell us, Dr. Jboor, what Doctors Against Genocide are doing. You're taking your case to Congress, which is the enabler, the funder, the obstructor to peace over there. The institution that basically says to Netanyahu, oh, only 20 billion? Is that all? Don't you want more? No public hearings by the committees, just an open check, while all kinds of impoverished Americans suffer from the lack of the necessities of life. Tell us what you're doing in Congress.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Nader. Thank you, everyone, for giving us the opportunity. We are going to Congress because, as you said, that's the belly of the beast. That's where the politicians who aided, abetted, and funded and continue to justify and enable this genocide are there. And they are doing it with our money as American people, but without our consent. A few months after this last phase of the genocide, the final solution that the war crime called Israel has started, we know that more than 70 to 80% of the American people, and multiple polls showing that all of them were for ceasefire and all of them are against these wars. And we think that as American people, we are good people. We don't stand for these crimes. We don't accept that any child, any mother, any father, any elderly in the world to be starved to death, no matter where they are, no matter who we are, no matter who is committing this crime. And we are especially appalled to know that all these crimes are being done in our name, with our tax money. They are cutting the funding from our basic programs here, from our neighborhoods, to send more billions to mass slaughter children. So that's why when you're going to DC, we're going to talk to the people who are enabling this. We think they already failed their constituents. They failed their country. They are putting our country on the wrong side of history. They are making America the most isolated in its history. Every country in the world has been against this genocide, continue to be against this genocide, is going more against this genocide. Even our traditional allies, UK, Canada, Australia, everyone is jumping off this sinking genocidal ship that is led by genocidal Israel and genocidal Netanyahu, except America, our government, our politicians seems, I don't know, is it the Epstein files or more than that, or just the APAC? They are bought by these special interest groups, by the war machine, by the war profiteers, and they are preferring those and their money or their videos that they're holding on them over us, the American people. And we, as part of the people, we say that we, as true and patriotic Americans, we refuse this. We refuse these crimes to be committed in our names, and we, the people, have the power. And if we all stand up, if we all do what we can do to stop these crimes, we do have more power than the people in power.
As you probably know, the Democrats in Congress could have shadow hearings, informal hearings for the House Armed Services and Foreign Relations where they're a minority, but they can have committee rooms and have hearings. They've already had hearings on domestic issues since the Republicans took power. Are you trying to get members there? Clearly, AIPAC's grip is starting to loosen. It's nowhere near what it needs to be, but there are several dozen members of the House and senators like Van Hollen from Maryland and Merkley from Oregon and Bernie Sanders, of course, prominently from Vermont, who are trying to demand a ceasefire, entry of humanitarian aid, and a resolution of the conflict. So do you find progress here?
So there is some progress, but it's not near where it should be. We still consider all of them to be enablers and complicit in this genocide, especially Sanders. Unfortunately, none of the elected officials in the United States have called it genocide yet, except for the very few. So we are calling out on Senator Sanders in particular, being the voice of the Jewish community here, to call it a genocide. It's too late. The fact that you are not calling it make you complicit and partner in this crime. Van Hollen is doing a great job. He's doing an amazing job, but he did not call it a genocide yet. AOC did not call it a genocide yet. Anyone who did not call this a genocide yet and did not demand full accountability for genocide, both for the United States and for Israel, is enabling and allowing this crime to continue further. We don't think this crime is just Netanyahu. We don't think it's just the Likud or the far right. We think all the Israeli government establishment, the Zionist project itself is genocidal. There are very credible Israeli polls saying that 80 to 90% of all Israelis are supporting this genocide. So, no, I disagree with you, Mr. Nader, on this. Most Israelis are complicit in this. They are pushing for this. They are partners in this. Israel is not just a normal country. Israel is a military state. So the population, the society itself is the one that is serving in the army, that is murdering children, that's starving babies, that's depriving them of formula and milk. The Israelis have a lot to do to get accountable to the crimes that they have been committing since 1948. The genocide started in 1948. What they're trying to do now.
For sure. Yeah, for sure. It's like the United States invading Iraq and blowing Iraq apart.
Please do not give credit to the perpetrators over the victims. We do not. Arpartov is not an authority on genocide. He's already too late.
Let me suggest something. Let me suggest something.
Too late on calling out the genocide.
Take
the victims.
Let me suggest. Excuse me, Dr. Jboor. In a positive way, let me suggest something. One of the world's experts on genocide has pronounced it again and again, genocide in Gaza. His name is Omar Bartok. You know him. He teaches at Brown University. He was in the Israeli army for 4 years and became a commander before he came to the United States. You take his statement before Amy Goodman on Democracy Now! And you go to any one of a dozen members of the House and have it inserted in the congressional record. So it's official part of the congressional record, and it breaks the logjam that you're talking about. And then there are all kinds of other scholars around the world, inside Israel and out, who have pronounced it as genocide. But it's, as I say, it's worse than genocide. The ultimate of genocide is omnicide. So use the congressional record. You have people like Ilhan Omar, you have Rashida Tlaib, you have people like Mark Pocan and others who will put it in the congressional record. And then you can put reprints out and you break the logjam. You like that idea?
Yes, I love it. Thank you for
Yes,
the
that's a
suggestion.
very good idea.
Go ahead,
Thank
Dr.
you. Yeah.
Now, I know you're in touch for Veterans with Peace. You're in touch with Feroz Sidwa and his group of doctors who put out wonderful demanding letters, demanding ceasefire, humanitarian aid. They've come back from Gaza on more than one occasion where they've seen the total catastrophe, the total savage brutality, the mass extermination. But are you in touch with increasing number of rabbis? 700 rabbis want food aid immediately, water, medicine into Gaza. American rabbis, they put a full-page ad in the New York Times a few weeks ago. We can't over-stereotype people here. We have 16 wonderful Israeli human rights groups that are very courageously taking on Netanyahu, including military reservists, rabbis for human rights, B'Tselem. Are you making contacts with Jewish Voice for Peace here in this country? If not now, another group of Jewish Americans. Tell us about that.
Yeah, thank you for this question. So, we are a medical organization, and our mission is to mobilize the medical community to speak out against genocide, war crimes, and crimes against humanity. Our focus is to bring the medical voice inside the halls of power, like the Congress or the Senate building, and speak up. We gave a platform for our colleagues to be able to speak up. We are also not faith based, not ethnicity based, not race based. We like to be thought of as humanistic medical organization that is focused on protecting life and honoring our oath to do no harm. Our members are very diverse. They come from every walk of life. They are medical professionals, most of them from all over the world, from every kind of faith. But when we go to the Congress or the Senate, we speak as a medical professional who is not aligned with any specific religion or specific ethnicity. So there is a lot of space for faith-based organization to do their work, and there is a lot of space for other groups to do their work. We work closely with Jewish Voice for Peace Health Council because they are medical professionals like we are. In terms of working with Israeli group, we actually want to be very independent from that. Israel is the perpetrator of the genocide. Initially, a lot of these Israeli medical groups refused to say that what is happening is a genocide. In fact, some of them made work with them conditional on not mentioning the word genocide. This is not something that we can accept as Doctors Against Genocide. We are committed to recognizing genocide wherever it is. In fact, we recognize, for example, the Armenian genocide, and many people who deny the Armenian genocide were very upset with us because we are marginalizing some groups that might not believe in that. We do not accept that. So we are committed to having our eyes open whenever and wherever there is a genocide or there is war crimes, crimes against humanity, no matter who commits them. And it's very important for us to stand with the victims, with the community that is suffering, and never take the side or give platform for the perpetrators.
Well, picking up on your focus, are you having difficulty with American medical societies taking a position here, like the American Medical Association? I understand the Pediatric Association has taken a position, probably too mild, but there are dozens of medical societies in this country who are seeing their colleagues slaughtered, doctors, healthcare workers in Gaza, and they haven't spoken up forcefully. Bring us up to date on that. Dr. Feroz Sidwa has been trying to get them to take stands.
I will quickly say one thing. It has been a very disappointing situation for us to speak with these societies. At the same time, our membership has been growing extremely rapidly, which tells us that there is a gap in the medical community, and an organization like ours is filling that gap because more and more doctors, nurses, medical professionals are joining us because they really want to be able to speak up and they need that platform. So our organization serves a very important task here. And I think a lot of these medical organizations and societies will regret their absence of moral stance on what is happening. And they will look back and feel shame and embarrassment about what they have done.
I think you're going to be very accurate on that. Dr. Jboor, you wanted to say something?
Yes, as Dr. Comerly mentioned, I mean, the major American associations in this country, the major universities, the Ivy Leagues have all failed humanity. They all failed even their own principles that says that they are there to protect humanity, universal human rights, wherever they are. But we should be reminded that the American Medical Association, which is one of the worst organizations not to take any position and to be silent on this, is owned by also the Zionist lobby and the supremacist ideology. They are part of the colonial structure that supported slavery when there were slavery. And the American Medical Association experimented on African American people at that time. They were silent during the Holocaust. They were silent during the apartheid. Actually, they were the last ones to go against the apartheid in South Africa, which paints very ugly history for them. And they only came like last year to apologize on what the American Medical Association stance was during slavery.
Dr. Jboor, is one bright spot the Medical Students Association? Haven't they spoken up?
The
They
medical
have,
students,
yeah.
they have been trying, and they have been trying for resolution through the American Medical Association to call for ceasefire, to call to end this genocide and this atrocity. But unfortunately, they have been silenced. And as you are all aware, our institutions, universities, and medical organizations have been silencing, have been punishing everyone who tries to speak up. We know the students are very vulnerable. They are trying their best, but they are many students who got fired from their schools, many students who got threatened not to say on this. Many of the students, many of the young people who have good conscience are trying their best. We know about the student encampment that went through the universities. They crushed it because if you allow a genocide overseas, you are expecting fascism here. And unfortunately, our political system, whether the Democrats or even worse now with the Republicans, I mean, fascism now is common stream. Anyone who tries to speak up against anything, even our right to speak, our First Amendment, our Constitution, is being threatened by our administrations, and they are destroying everything good that this country or the whole world or human stands for in the service on one group, in the service of one group and the war machine and the Zionists, whether Jewish or.
And as you know, Trump is the one person that can stop Netanyahu, but he's a coward, and he's afraid of the domestic Israeli government can do no wrong lobby here, AIPAC and others. We're running out of time, unfortunately, so let's go to Steve for your question to Dr. Kuemmerle and Dr. Jboor.
Obviously, we're focused on Gaza because that's what's happening there is horrific. Are there other genocides going on around the world that are just now under the radar we really don't know about?
Yes, and we try to shed light on them. If you actually watch some of our webinars, we had guests from Rohingya, we had guests from Sudan and from Congo and from Tigray. There are a lot of genocides that are happening. Tigray in particular is one genocide that is being overlooked, and we need to learn more about it and stand up against it. Our focus on the situation in Gaza comes from the simple fact that our country is complicit. And because of that, we actually have the moral obligation and the practical obligation to actually speak up. So it is not because we think that other genocides are not happening or not important. We actually think every genocide should never happen. It's anti-human to commit genocide. And we always ask our colleagues to come to us to help uplift the voices of the communities of genocide. And hopefully we will have more bandwidth to do a lot more. But the situation in Gaza is unique because there is almost a collusion of all these powerful players to complete this genocide in Gaza and basically oppress every resistance to it. There are many things that make what is happening in Gaza unique. For example, the inability to leave, using food as a weapon, having complete siege on the population, having a major superpower supported by another major superpower, bombing a population of 2 million people in a very small area, constantly, nonstop for 2 years. It's just like Mr. Nader said, this is beyond genocide in Gaza.
By the way, just a suggestion, Dr. Kuemmerle and Dr.
Yeah.
Jboor. Be sure you're not trapped by the discussion about genocide, important as it is. You should also use the word mass murder, mass slaughter. That's something that resonates with everybody. Where genocide gets into a legal argument, which shouldn't even be a legal argument. It's the most hands-down demonstration of genocide in modern world, period. Especially with the U.S. completely engaged in enabling it, protecting it, weaponizing it, and working hand in glove with the savage Netanyahu regime perpetrating the Palestinian Holocaust. That's what should be publicized too. It's a Palestinian Holocaust, which is enabled by the U.S. Let's go to David.
Doctors, do we know how many physicians there were in Gaza before October 7th and how many there are now? And do we know how many have been killed by the IDF?
Yes, I mean, I don't have exact numbers on how many doctors were there before and how many are there now, but we know for a fact more than 1,500 doctors and healthcare workers have been killed and murdered during this genocide. We know that more than 400, 500 doctors, healthcare workers are still illegally abducted and tortured in Israeli detention camps and torture centers. We know that the bed capacity for the hospitals in Gaza was about 3,500 beds before this genocide, and it's down to less than 1,000 now. And even the 1,000 beds that are available are understaffed. They don't have the supplies, they don't have the medications. They are being attacked inside the hospitals, inside their clinics, inside their ORs. This is part of what we call in DAG as a medicide. It is an attempt to destroy the medical community, because when you kill a doctor or displace a doctor or force a doctor out of business or injure them, I don't have an accurate number on the number of injured doctors, healthcare workers, but if you get a doctor out of service, you're not just getting one person out of service, you're getting someone who can help and save hundreds of the victims going forward. And Israel also has committed what we call a scholasticide, which is the destruction, the complete destruction of the whole educational system. All these universities have been bombed. There is not a single university that stands now, not a medical school, not any other school. All the even regular schools are being used. The ones who are still standing, that are not bombed, are used to shelter the victims who are being displaced multiple times over. This is scholasticide. Then there is the medicide. And as a definition, we don't really worry about using the definition, because our group came with a medical definition of genocide, because unfortunately the international law, the legal system, the international rule-based order has failed humanity. And if you give the genocide just to the ICC and the ICJ to take 10 years or 15 years or 20 years of deliberation, legal deliberation, to just come with the evidence to prove this is a genocide, you already failed the victims. We doctors, we go to school, we swore an oath to protect life. We are coming up with a definition that is preventative. In medicine, we care about, I don't care about the historians like Omar Bartov after 2 years to come and tell me this is genocide, or ICJ after 20 years to tell me this is genocide when all the victims are gone. As a doctor, it's my moral and the professional and ethical obligation to protect life from being lost in the beginning. That's why we call genocide very early, and we don't care about the intent. When there are risk factors, there are very well-known risk factors of dehumanization, stigmatization, the demoralization of communities that come, the hate speech that's built against certain communities, consider them as animals, consider them as security threats, as terrorists, as vermin. All these signs and symptoms, we can pick these with scientific accuracy. That when we see these signs, we have to call it out, leverage our voice with our protection to solve these conflicts and to solve or to combat the hate speech early on, before there is mass slaughter, before there is mass murder. But even after, under the genocide conviction, mass death is not a requirement for genocide. You don't need to have enormous number of people to consider it a genocide. Israel itself is giving us the intent. They gave us the intent of genocide in 1880 when they said a land with no people. That was the first genocidal declaration by the Zionist movement. They already erased the existence of the whole people there. That is genocidal. The whole project is built on genocide. It's not built on coexistence. It's not built on creating something good for all inhabitants of the land. It's supremacy, Jewish supremacy, supported by white supremacy, and exclusive. It's only for just one group of people.
Hannah?
As doctors, I imagine you deal with people in denial almost every day. How, if I am in denial about a genocide, how do you help me see the genocide, the disease that I have? How do you bring me through those stages of recognizing that there's something I need to confront?
Hannah, very difficult question that you asked, but we as a humanity, we continue to evolve and we continue to try to improve. Just like slavery was acceptable centuries ago, we managed to get rid of it and we managed to have a unified belief that it is wrong. Just like we also believe that women should have equal rights to men and children should have the right to health and the right to education and the right to protection. We all work together as a human race to that. So how do I convince the uninitiated to something like this? We really have to do a very good job with education. We have to show how incremental dehumanization language and dehumanizing behavior predicts a pattern that leads to genocide unless everyone recognizes it early and puts a stop to it. So, Hannah, it's like we would have to go through history and show how, with the Holocaust, there was incremental dehumanization of the Jewish population in Europe, where, the rhetoric became very aggressive towards them. Then their ghettoization started, and then pogroms started, and then discrimination in the workplace was happening to them. They could not have freedom of movement. And all that led to the final Holocaust picture that is horrifying to all of us now. We also see the same thing in the Armenian genocide, where the intellectuals of the Armenian society were discriminated against, removed from their jobs as university professors. The language against them became very aggressive and very violent, and all that culminated in a genocide. The same thing was happening in Palestine from very early on with the phrase, a land without a people for a people without a land, which basically eliminated the people on the land of Palestine as if they did not exist. And that translated into practices where, the Palestinians were expelled from their land without any thought of bringing them back. Even before 1948, before the war, the villages where the Palestinians were expelled from, all more than 400 villages were completely bombed and destroyed, and 3 forests were planted on top of them. Something that makes you think of what is happening in Gaza now. There is like the complete demolition of all homes, all structures in preparation for complete expulsion. So all these things show that there is a very dedicated program for extermination of the population, whether by killing it, whether by making life impossible for it, whether by limiting fertility rate, limiting children numbers by killing them, and preparing for complete expulsion or complete extermination.
Now, we're almost out of time, but not before I ask you, Dr. Kuemmerle and Dr. Jboor, are you getting any media? Have you gotten on NPR or PBS? Have you gotten the New York Times, Washington Post? They have a lot of copy devoted to Israel, Palestine. They don't seem to be able to cover the resistance. Have you gotten any coverage?
Unfortunately, we did not get, because we think the mainstream media is actually one of the most powerful tools of this genocide. This is not a genocide that has been ignored by the media. This is a genocide that has been justified and enabled and continue to be enabled and justified and explained by the mainstream media. And we are honored at Doctors Against Genocide to be uncompromising when it comes to saving lives, when it comes to the truth. And we refuse to give the mainstream media what they want, which is to whitewash an ongoing genocide and mass starvation of a whole people. So part of their participation in this genocide, unfortunately, they are censoring the truth voices, the pro-humanity voices, the voices that are speaking in the genocide. And even when they allow any of these voices to be broadcasted on their media or the New York Times, they try to use just the weakest and the mildest arguments about it because they know what they're doing and they are part of the genocide enablement complex.
Yeah. What you say is true, but you don't want to accept it as 100% prejudgment. Karen DeYoung, the foreign relations editor for the Washington Post, knows what true news stories should be all about. You should contact her. Lila Fidel at NPR, she knows the area very well. And you should contact Matt Purdy, the editor-at-large of the New York Times, who also know what the situation is, so that you start breaking through here. And I'm pleased to inform you that in the forthcoming issue of the Capitol Citizen, Linda Gunther has an article about your group. It's called Anybody Home? Doctors Against Genocide Take Their Case to Capitol Hill. And people can go to capitolhillcitizen.com. Thank you very, very much.
Thank you very much
Thank
for
you.
your advice and for the time that you gave us here. And we will listen to what you said again. And I think I personally learned a lot from you. So I appreciate this time. Thank you.
Thank you.
Well, thank both of
everyone.
you who are practicing physicians, tending to patients every day, as well as your civic duties as leaders of Doctors Against Genocide. You will break through. You just have to avoid prejudgment, even though it's real, and try to elbow your way into the mainstream media. And certainly you can get on Amy Goodman and Democracy Now! You should try to do that if you haven't been on. Is there any website you want to give?
Yes, our website is www.doctorsagainstgenocide.org. If anyone has any questions or you want to reach to us, they can reach us at our email info@doctorsagainstgenocide.org. Mr. Verder, thank you for the opportunity. Thank you, everyone. You have always been an inspiration for me, even when I was young, living in Palestine. I knew about you for decades and decades, and your experience is very much valued. We might be a little bit angry now because the crime is too big, but your wisdom and your truth will reverberate and we will learn from it. United, we will win. So we need all the voices, your voice, your movement, everyone here, our voice, the medical community, the people of the world, whether we are in the United States, we're in Mexico, South America, China, the Middle East, Europe. We, the people of the world, the citizens of the world, should own our world and should create a better reality for us now and a future for our children. Otherwise, if we leave them at the mercy of the elites, the mega rich, the special interests, the supremacists, wherever they are, whether Jewish supremacy or Muslim supremacy or Christian supremacy, we will all lose. We need to do everything we can. And Mr. Verder, we are not here because we're doing our civil duty. We think what we're doing is medicine, because in medicine, saving lives is our utmost goal, and it is our oath that we swear. And we think we can save more lives by stopping a genocide, or even better, by preventing a genocide, by stopping a war, by preventing a war, by pressuring our politicians to solve conflicts peacefully without murder, without loss of life. So we think that is actually part of medicine, and we are actually pushing the medical school to incorporate.
That's right.
Into medical
All
education.
professions have their own specialized civic duties, Dr. Jboor. I've written extensively on that, and I want to tell the listeners that the people who are peace-loving all over the world vastly outnumber the warmongers and the cruel and vicious interests that have taken advantage of the situation. Thank you very, very much, and we'll spread the word about Doctors Against Genocide throughout the media in the United States. Keep doing what you're doing.
We've been speaking with Doctors Karameh Hawash-Kuemmerle and Nidal Jboor from Doctors Against Genocide. We will link to their work at ralphnaderradiohour.com. We're going to step away for a minute, but when we come back, we're going to talk to another in our series on doers, ordinary citizens who take it upon themselves to make the world a better place. But first, let's check in with our corporate crime reporter, Russell Mokhiber.
From the National Press Building in Washington, D.C., this is your Corporate Crime Reporter Morning Minute for Friday, July 25, 2025. I'm Russell Mokhiber. When members of Congress talk about risks from artificial intelligence, they talk about every risk imaginable. You will hear politicians talk about risks like fake news, polarization, threats to democracy, and deepfake harassment. What you will rarely hear a member of Congress address is existential risk. But AI researchers, on average, believe there's a 14% chance that once we build a superintelligent AI, it will lead to very bad outcomes, including human extinction. Pause AI is a group that is organizing to address the existential threat head-on. They have organized a letter calling for pausing AI development that has been signed by over 33,000 people, including many AI researchers and tech leaders. For the Corporate Crime Reporter, I'm Russell Mokhiber.
Thank you, Russell. Welcome back to the Ralph Nader Radio Hour. I'm Steve Scrovan, along with David Feldman, Hannah, and Ralph. Our next guest is on a mission to transform and heal the relationship between our human culture and the trees of the American landscape. David?
Marcus Sims is the owner of Treincarnation, which creates sustainably harvested lumber and builds custom furniture from trees felled by storms or removed to make way for development. Welcome to the Ralph Nader Radio Hour, Marcus Sims.
Thank you very much. Nice to be here.
Welcome, Marcus. What you're doing is really spectacular, and you're trying to spread it all over the country, I know. And the Washington Post actually brought what you do to our attention on May 3rd, 2025. And the title was Felled Oak Trees to Get New Life as Tables at Tacoma Park Library. And it starts this way, quote, when a tree is cut down, it marks the end of decades of life rooted in one place. But where some see an ending, Marcus Sims eyes an opportunity for a return. That's why he spent the past 35 years of his life acquiring felled trees, sawing them up, and turning planks of lumber into unique pieces of furniture and other custom-built projects. So you could hardly have a better idea for recycling and for maintaining the memory of beloved trees near where people live in their neighborhoods. I'm going to give an example of that personally about our mighty super maple tree. But before we get into that, describe how you do this and what kind of demand is there for it. In other words, you have more people demanding that you turn their beloved fallen trees into furniture, or do you have to persuade them? Because what you see on streets all over the country is when the tree is cut down, within an hour, it's turned into powder in the back of a truck, which I think is a kind of desecration. At any rate, give us your narrative here, Marcus Sims.
Yeah, well, what you just described is kind of exactly why I'm doing what I'm doing, because I would see like walnut logs lying along in somebody's yard, chopped into firewood. And I basically thought, I think we can do better than that. And so I started salvaging logs a long time ago and milling them up into lumber. And so it's an involved process that requires a sawmill and some land to stack lumber on, to stack logs on. And so I'm fairly well networked with builders, with arborists, with tree services, with homeowners. And so, I get quite a few calls of people who would prefer that a tree that they've lived with, a living creature that they've lived with for many years, that the fallen tree get used for something. And as you said, not desecrated, but honored in some way for really the gift that trees are for us.
Tell us about your current project, because I think it'll relate to people, for the Tacoma Park, Maryland Library. Tacoma Park is a suburb of Washington, D.C., and you've been working with the library for about 4 years. Exactly what are you doing?
Well, so they were expanding the library, adding on a new building, and they took down several trees, and 3 of them I decided were of a quality that we could use to make lumber. And so they delivered the trees to me, and I milled them up into lumber and dried them. And now I'm building about 17 tables that are going to go back into the library. And so part of my work is I make live edge lumber, which is lumber where the edges are not straightened. They have the natural shape of the outside of the tree still attached to the board. Of course, you can cut that off later if you want to, but you can also utilize those live edges in the furniture that you build. And so part of that is just to bring the amazing beauty of nature into, in this case, into the library, where young people and people of all ages will be sitting and reading and studying. And so my intention is to kind of create an environment with this furniture where they can be maybe inspired or just enjoy the beauty that comes from nature that is brought into the library.
Well, you're more than an ordinary woodworker recycling fallen trees into useful furniture. You're an artist as well. For example, in the Washington Post, they say that 7 of the tables you're most excited to construct for the library are for the children's reading space, and you want to be playful with the shapes and designs for those tables, especially with using his preferred live edge finishing, where he retains the natural contours of the wood, end quote. I'm curious, when these trees fall, isn't there a lot of unusable wood, rotten wood? How do you deal with getting the strong part of the tree out into the furniture?
Sure. Well, the main part of the tree that we would actually use in the work that I do is the main trunk, because you really want the vertical part of the tree, which has kind of balanced pressures inside of it. A branch that's growing out, you can't really use because the lower part of the branch, the wood is compressed, and on the upper part of the branch, the wood is stretched. And so it just doesn't make good lumber. But we use the vertical parts. And you mentioned the children's tables. I am excited about that because childhood is such an important time of life that shapes adults, ultimately, what they experience in childhood. And so my aim is to, right now in our culture, there's so many right angles. Everything is square and sort of machined or rectangular. And so I'm going to build tables that, even though the plan calls for, let's say, a 3-foot square table, I'm going to make a table that is, let's say, 34 inches wide on one end and 37 inches wide on the other end. And some of that is just to move us out of this adherence to right angles. And then I'm going to employ the live edges. Sometimes the live edge might be on the interior of the table, where you can arrange it so that there's like a live edge void on the inside of the table, which I think is kind of playful. And, it'd be an interesting thing to be looking at while you're contemplating your homework.
Do you have a little message on the tables, like where it came from, what tree?
Yeah, I think we'll do something like that. I certainly have some photographs of the process of sawing the logs up and things like that. But we'll probably come up with some material that maybe will hang on the wall in the library that tells the whole story, because the stories we tell ourselves are very important.
Well, just like Carnegie built thousands of libraries in communities around the country, we've always believed that every community should have an arboretum as a refuge and as an educational location. You're quoted in the Post as saying, quote, "I think we're having a little problem in our culture with getting too disconnected from nature," end quote. Sims said, quote, "Part of my philosophy is to bring nature into the home," end quote. Are you getting any support by forestry departments so they can incorporate it in the teaching of forestry to the students around the country, like the Yale School of Forestry?
I'm not per se connected with forestry schools. I have worked with the USDA some. They helped me with a kiln to dry the wood. I think there's a lot of support for what I'm doing, but my work is contrasted to the industrial lumber system, which is chop them down and cut them up, a lot of it done by huge machines. So it takes a lot more attention and care to do the kind of work that I'm doing. And of course, the finances, as you know, finances plays a big part in any kind of industry and how they can manage to make money. So I'm certainly making a good living with what I'm doing. I don't know exactly how we can get from the current system into one that was probably used in the past, where the intelligence of human beings is more engaged and we're not slaves to industrial processes.
Jessica Jones, an administrator in the Tacoma Park Library, had a very lovely statement about what you're doing, and I want to share it with our listeners. She said, quote, "I think it's a lovely tribute to these trees, especially as this memorial tree had to come down to be able to be integrated into that space on a permanent basis and be seen and used and loved by everybody as they were when they were outside, just, in a different way," end quote. And that was a memorial tree in the memory of Martin Luther King. Do you find that utility companies like electric and telephone companies are a bit too aggressive in cutting down trees that interfere with their lines in community after community? Does that trouble you at all?
Well, I mean, it really depends. It depends on the actual people who are involved. Yeah, certainly things can get cut down a little too rampantly, and sometimes people are just in a rush and they don't take much care about it. That kind of reminds me of a hickory tree that I salvaged that was cut down by the state highway administration. It was growing along a highway. I'm not sure why they cut it down because it wasn't particularly close, but it was a hickory tree, and I salvaged 3 10-foot logs from it. And the logs were about 18 inches in diameter, large, but not really huge. But I counted the rings on this tree, and it was 200 years old. So
wow.
It was really,
Yeah.
really cool to get wood like that grew very, very slowly, for 200 years.
Well, speaking of a mighty tree, I want to share a story. We grew up in Connecticut with a mighty super maple tree in front with huge branches and leaves and so many birds and squirrels inhabiting it. And it was a major part of nature in our growing up. I wrote about it in my book, 17 Traditions. And the time came when it became pretty old. It was about 125 years old. So they started cutting some of the branches. And then the town condemned it and it had to come down. And we got a carpenter, took part of the trunk and turned it into 2 nice wooden benches as well as a chair. And he was very happy. He had not done that before. And he was very happy. He felt very creative. And just want to give an example, listeners, to be alert to the trees that you grew up with and you have to witness their demise, and they can be reborn, which is why you call your group Treincarnation. Let's go to Steve.
Marcus, very quickly, give us a little bit of your background on what inspired Treincarnation.
Well, I studied music in college, actually, so I'm artistically oriented. But as I started out, I saw these walnut trees chopped into firewood, and I thought we could do better than that, And I've always had a connection with nature. When I was growing up, I spent a lot of time alone out in the woods, traveling around in the military family. The woods was my haven, It actually became an obsession. And after I had put a lot of money into salvaging logs and making all this lumber, I didn't really have anything to do, no way to use the lumber. And I wasn't a furniture maker at that time. I was working as a carpenter and a handyman. And I remember one time where I saw them taking down a really large mulberry tree. It had a beautiful trunk. And I was just talking to myself. I said, just keep on driving, forget this tree, just go. But I didn't. I turned around and I stopped, and I ended up salvaging this mulberry tree and made some very beautiful tables out of it. So it was a calling that was deep inside of me that just insisted that I keep doing what I was doing. And eventually it became a business. So now I'm a full-time furniture maker and lumber maker.
Let's go to David. Question for Marcus Sims.
Marcus, you have skills that I lack and could never gain. How do we teach children that what you do is more important a skill and a vocation than 99% of what they're going to be encouraged to do for a living?
That's an excellent question. How do we do that? We have to, I guess, change our own consciousness about these sorts of things. And we have to teach, this is what culture is all about, is passing down values and teaching our children. And so I think it's really important that children get direct experience out in nature, get direct experience working with their hands, and get direct experience with the kind of materials like wood is just an amazing material that humans have been using for, who knows how many tens of thousands of years, and we can still use it, and the trees are still here. And so I just think those kinds of opportunities need to be valued, and we need to pursue teaching our children these kinds of connections with nature and embodied work, working with your body, with all the amazing things that our bodies can do, and learning to work with tools. And unfortunately, some of this is falling away. It's hard to find a good young person who has some of these skills, whereas 50 years ago, every school had a shop class.
Well, we've been speaking with Marcus Sims, who is a converter of fallen trees into useful furniture of all kinds. And he knows his trees and he knows his wood, and more people should learn about what he's doing. He's looking for an apprentice. He'd like people around the country to learn about woodworking in high schools and to have more connection with nature. Thank you for your wonderful work. We're going to do everything possible to publicize it around the country. Marcus Sims. Do you have a website at all, or
Yes.
they can reach you?
Yeah, my website is Treincarnation.com, which is the word reincarnation with a T in front of it, .com. Thank you very much for the interview. It was good to talk with you.
You're welcome, Marcus. To be continued.
Right. Thank you.
We've been speaking with Marcus Sims. We have a link to his work at ralphnaderradiohour.com. Now, Ralph, to close out the show, tell us about this letter you've written.
We're not the only ones who wonder about the silence of our former presidents who have been attacked by Donald Trump and his cohorts mercilessly and have not spoken up and reflected their vast constituency of voters after, obviously, they received many, many tens of millions of votes to become president of the United States. We have drafted, Bruce Fein, I, and Lou Fisher have drafted an open letter to Barack Obama to take the lead, and very specifically provided him with the assignments that flow from his huge popularity, his huge support all over the country that he has not tapped into in order to challenge the Trump fascist dictatorship. And David Feldman will read this short letter to you right now. David?
Dear Mr. Obama, we are dismayed at your idling while summoning citizens to man the barricades against President Donald Trump's daily wrecking ball against the United States Constitution, usurping the war power, the power of the purse, and the treaty power, decimating a professional, non-political civil service, unilaterally dismantling federal agencies created by Congress, refusing to faithfully execute the laws for personal, partisan political gain, shouting for the impeachment of federal judges who've arrested his chronic illegalities, suppressing, punishing, or sanctioning peaceful political dissent, deporting alleged aliens to torture chambers without due process, doubting his constitutional oath of office, flirting with an unconstitutional third term, extorting private law firms and universities, shredding the social safety net for the ill-housed, ill-clothed, or ill-fed, aiding and abetting genocide in Gaza, and enriching himself by doing presidential favors for foreign nations that patronize his sprawling business empire in violation of the Foreign Emoluments Clause. You are a Harvard Law graduate. You served as president of the prestigious Harvard Law Review. You taught constitutional law at the University of Chicago. You cannot claim ignorance of Mr. Trump's counter-revolution against July 4th 1776. Having served 2 terms as president, you stand at the commanding heights of the Democratic Party, to whom much is given, much is expected. Former Presidents Bill Clinton and George W. Bush had laid the groundwork by casting aspersions on Mr. Trump's cruel, alarming ambitions. You should be networking with former government officials, summoning and addressing town meetings to awaken Americans to their constitutional peril, raising funds to upend Republican control of Congress in 2026, and to support local civics activism, advocating informal Democratic impeachment hearings, establishing a social media presence to expose President Trump's serial lying, extortion, and cruelties. Display half of the courage of the 56 signatories to the American Declaration of Independence who signed their own death warrants to secure the unalienable rights of every individual to life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. By exhibiting such leadership, you will leave footprints in the sands of time. Sincerely, Bruce Fine, Ralph Nader, Louis Fisher.
Thank you for that, David. I want to thank our guests again, Dr. Karameh Hawash-Kuemmerle and Dr. Nidal Jboor, and Marcus Sims. For those of you listening on the radio, that's our show. For you podcast listeners, stay tuned for some bonus material we call the Wrap-Up, featuring Francesco DeSantis with, in case you haven't heard, a transcript of this program will appear on the Ralph Nader Radio Hour Substack site soon after the episode is posted.
Subscribe to us on our Ralph Nader Radio Hour YouTube channel. And for Ralph's weekly column, it's at nader.org. For more from Russell Mokhiber, it's at corporatecrimereporter.com. To order your copy of the Capitol Hill Citizen, Democracy Dies in Broad Daylight, it's at capitolhillcitizen.com.
And remember to continue the conversation after each show. Go to the comments section at ralphnaderradiohour.com and post a comment or question on this week's episode.
The producers of the Ralph Nader Radio Hour are Jimmy Lee Wirt, Hannah Feldman, and Matthew Marin. Our executive producer, Alan Minsky.
Our theme music, Stand Up, Rise Up, was written and performed by Kemp Harris. Our proofreader is Elizabeth Solomon.
Join us next week on the Ralph Nader Radio Hour. Thank you, Ralph.
Thank you, everybody.
You ought to step up, rise up, rise up. I know you ought to rise up and stand up, stand up. You've been saying, I think you step up. I think that you should step up, rise up. Don't let the system hold you down. Stand up, stand up. You've been saying, stand up, step up. I think you should step up.